And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com. Joining me, as always, is Still Curtain contributor Shayne Kubas. Shayne, I am excited today. We're going to talk about Pittsburgh's draft results. I'm interested to hear what you have to say. We're going to break down each selection. We're going to give a grade for our picks. We're going to give an overall grade for the draft. We're also going to talk about what other media outlets have given the Steelers in terms of grades so far. And we're going to dissect the biggest winners and losers from the Steelers roster as a result of Pittsburgh's draft. So let's get to it, Shayne. The Steelers earned A+ grades from Pro Football Focus in back-to-back years, but it's not just PFF. Here's a list of some of the grades that they earned this year. A+ from PFF, an A from Pro Football Network, an A from NFL.com, an A+ from the Touchdown Wire, a B+ from the Associated Press, B+ from CBS Sports, A+ from Bleacher Report, A+ from Fox Sports, A from The Ringer, A+ from Sporting News, A+ from Sports Illustrated, A- from ESPN, A from The Score, an A for CBS Sports, an A from Sharp Football, A+ for USA Today, A from Yahoo Sports, A for the New York Post, a B for Washington Post, and the B from the Sideline Reporter. Shayne, the collection of these grades gives the Steelers the highest ranking draft of all 32 teams in the NFL. I know that you probably haven't had a chance to kind of go through everybody's selections and dissect everything here, but do you think that's fair to give the Steelers this high of grades for their draft?
So, because I do some scouting stuff on the side, I actually have gone through all the drafts and kind of graded them
Nice.
myself. So I have had the chance to do that. And it's not that it was like a runaway favorite or anything like that, but they did end up being my top draft as well. Bias obviously aside. It's so for me personally, and you have to remember, like, and you do this too, Tommy. So we do scout these players in the draft. Like, it's something that we both do.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, from my perspective, they took the number 12 player on my board with Fatanu. They took the I think it was 38 player in Zach Frazier. They took the
Mm-hmm.
number 40 or number 50 player in Peyton Wilson. They took the number and then 53 player with Mason McCormick. And then I think finally it was with, with Roman Wilson ended up
Yeah.
being 62 on my board. So with their first 5 picks, they took all players that were in like the top 60 or so of the players on my board. So from my perspective, especially, I have to give it the highest grade because no one else came close to doing that in this draft. Now, if I'm wrong about the players, and I guess it doesn't matter, but that's not what we're talking about right now, right? Like we won't know we won't know the answer to the actual grade of this class for several years. But just on the surface, from my perspective, yes, they absolutely knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, I know a lot of people hate like these instant analysis, like
Yeah,
post-draft grades.
I get it.
I kind of like to see what analysts have to say and then go back and check a few years later. Like last year's draft, it received really high praise, and I think it's going to be a great draft. It doesn't always work out that way. I think it might have been the 2019 class where the Steelers got Devin Bush and Justin Lane and a few other guys that didn't work out. Deontay was good, but it doesn't always line up with the grades. But on paper, this is an incredibly strong draft. And to give you an idea that the other two teams that ranked just below the Steelers in terms of their average draft grades were the Philadelphia Eagles, who stole Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean in back-to-back picks in this draft.
Yeah.
And then the Chicago Bears, who obviously they landed Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze, two of the top 5 or 6 players this year.
Yeah, hard to argue with that. So, those were 3 of the teams that were my top 5 drafts. So I tend to agree with the consensus there. Again, like we'll see how these guys play out. Obviously for the Bears, it's pretty straightforward. They got a franchise quarterback and a possible franchise receiver. Kind of hard to really do anything else wrong. But from that point, I think if they hadn't taken a punter in the 4th round, I might have given them the top draft just by default. But honestly, yeah, I think the Steelers cleaned up. I think they did everything they came in to do. And I think more importantly, and we'll kind of talk more about this, especially when we get into like winners and losers and stuff like that, there's an identity that they're trying to create again that I think this has been made very clear by the choices they made in the draft.
Yeah, absolutely. It has been. And we're going to dissect each pick here in just a second. But before we do that, let's talk about the Steelers rumor mill that is
Yeah, that
swirling
shot
here.
up as soon as the
I
draft
mean,
was over.
Shayne, as soon as the season was over, basically, and especially after the Steelers traded Deontay Johnson, like
Mhm.
we have not gone more than a few days at a time without hearing about a potential trade for wide receiver. It didn't happen in the pre-draft process. It did not happen during the draft, as many predicted, and I wouldn't have shocked me at all had it happened then.
Yeah.
And there were rumors that the Steelers were inquiring about players during the draft, even Deebo Samuel reaching out to the 49ers to see what an asking price might be before they made the Zach Frazier pick. And now after the draft, Shayne, we are still hearing these rumors. Obviously, Bryant McFadden had the tweets about a significant player potentially coming to
significant
Pittsburgh.
Playmaker, he said specifically,
Significant playmaker,
which is what got people riled up. Yeah.
Yeah, and that doesn't even, I guess, really narrow it down, because I guess you can have playmakers on the defensive side of the ball too.
Right.
They need a slot cornerback. I think most people are assuming that this is a wide receiver. I know Cortland Sutton is the biggest name floating out there right now that logically probably makes the most sense, because you're probably talking about like a future 4th round pick. And the cap is right, like the price is right for him compared to some of these other monster contracts. Like Deebo's got like a $28.4 million cap number, I think, for this year. So some of these trade rumors make more sense than others do. But Cortland Sutton, Brandon Ayuk, DK Metcalf, even these are some of the names that are swirling out there right now. Benjamin Albright, I think, mentioned all 3 of these guys just recently. And some of these have been shot down by some in the media. It's hard to know what's truthful, what's realistic, and what's not. If you ask Omar Khan, who was just on the Pat McAfee show, he would tell you that there's nothing going on right now. Well, but I don't know what else he's going to say.
Yeah, what else would you say in that situation? That's the thing, is I think everyone is kind of keeping it close to the vest, but I think everyone understands the position that these teams are in. We know that the Broncos clearly don't really care for Sutton as much as maybe they should. They're trying to go in a different direction offensively. They have brought in a new quarterback. They brought in his receiver in college. Like, obviously, Franklin and Sutton could not be more different in terms of their play styles, but they still brought in a new receiver that you assume they did that for a reason, to kind of help Nix along. Mm-hmm. The Seahawks are in a weird spot because they have Lockett, Metcalf, and Jackson Smith-Njigba, where, like, that's a great receiving core, but Lockett's getting up there. Metcalf is a really good player, but, you know, how much of an impact is he going to make on a week-to-week basis? His production kind of is very streaky. Their direction offensively could go anyway, especially with the new offensive coordinator coming in. And then we know the Niners are kind of in the spot where they have to make a decision on probably at least one of these receivers. You know, they took Pearsall in the first round, which I think was a good pick for them if they're going to move on from one of these guys. I like Pearsall, maybe a little early for me, but still I get it. But they clearly have there's a decision being made internally, like which one of these receivers are we going to tie ourselves to beyond 2024? Like, maybe we don't see him move until after the season because they're trying to go for it again, but it's going to happen soon.
Yeah, I think that Omar might be looking for that sweet spot. Maybe he's waiting to come down on the price. There could be a number of factors in play here. I think it's very clear still that the Steelers have a need at wide receiver. Having
Even
said that,
Wilson,
I love what they did in the draft. So we're going to talk about that more in just a little bit. But I feel like you really can't go into the season with Van Jefferson as your outside receiver opposite of George Pickens. And I just don't know what other options you have available to you. So I would not be surprised if something did happen, even though Omar Khan is brushing these trade rumors off like they're nothing at all. So let's get into this, Shayne. I want to break down the impressive Steelers 2024 draft class. Let's go pick by pick here. I want to know your thoughts. I want to know what you were thinking when the Steelers were on the clock, and maybe even who you would have gone with, like in your mind, because I know I do this for me, and sometimes I'll even tweet these out so that I've got my hard copy proof of this if I ever need to go back and look at it. So let's talk about first round pick, 20 overall right here, Troy Fautanu to the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is one that not a lot of people got right in their final mocks. You're looking at Graham Barton. You're looking at Amarius Mims, who obviously went a few picks ahead of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I feared, Shayne, I wrote about this weeks prior.
I thought the Bengals might do it. I was mocking
the Bengals were that team. Yep. And if you listen to Joe Goodberry at all, if you follow him on Twitter, he's been very, very accurate with predicting the Bengals selection correctly. Yes. He predicted Goodberry. I think he's got like 7 picks in a row now for Cincinnati, correct in the first round. That was my guy. That's the guy that I mocked to the Steelers. When he was gone, my mind went to, all right, it's going to be Graham Barton now. I mean, because all the signs were pointing to Amarius Mims, Graham Barton. This makes the selection easy. Well, I don't think the Steelers expected Troy Fautanu to be on the clock when they were picking. So I am a little bit surprised still that they went that direction, because it did break a lot of trends. I mean, you drafted an offensive tackle that is under 6'4". You took a guy over from the West Coast who you really don't do that in the first round. The last time you did that was David DeCastro, and you're talking a decade ago. And so I think that it did go against some trends. I'm happy with this. I like that we can kind of throw some of these things away, knowing that you don't just have to stick to a guy that you were that you saw at the pro day. So did you think that the selection was going to be Fautanu? And who would you have picked in this case?
So for me, I will say it shocked me that they took him mostly because of two things. One, like you said, it bucks a lot of trends for them. They typically don't go that far west for players, and they typically don't take a player that didn't really hit a lot of the metrics that we talk about a lot. Which, again, it's nice to see that it's not a guarantee. Like, being able to be not only incorrect about what you're doing, but also like know that shows might not just be broadcasting the entire planet what they're doing is kind of nice. But the other reason it shocked me is, again, I didn't view him as somebody that they were going to love a ton, even though he was my number 12 player. So, like, I certainly had him, even over Mims, I had him as a better player.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't think he'd be there. But him being there, what this signals to me for this pick is Khan is willing to, if a player is high enough on his board, it doesn't matter that they didn't do all the stuff with them. If the player that is there is higher than the player that they focused on because they didn't expect that player to be there, he will pull the trigger on that player. Like, that's what I think happened here. I think they expected Mims to be there, or was hoping he would be there. I think he would have been the pick had he been there. But once he goes off the board, Barton's up there, but I think they must have just had a monster grade on Fautanu and said, you know what, he's here. He's a left tackle probably for us, or a right tackle, whichever tackle spot they would have put him at. Doesn't matter to me. Let's just bring him in the building, because especially for what they're trying to do with the wide zone, with Smith coming in, with his ability in the run game and his foot quickness in the pass game, like, this is the type of tackle that I want them to focus on, because that's what happens in the modern NFL. You have to be able to handle the speed, the power from edge rushers. He can do both of those things with his shorter frame but longer arms, right? Like, that's the key thing.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the height. I think they care about that a little bit, but I think they care much more about length, and he checked that metric for them.
Is there somebody else that you had in mind with that pick? Was it Barton for you?
It would have been Barton. It would have been Barton but again, Fautanu was higher on my board, so I still would have taken Fautanu if I was them. When I saw that, I was like, okay, so they definitely saw him similar to probably how I saw him. So, but if it wasn't him, it would have been Barton. Is my pick.
Yeah, I would have taken Troy Fautanu as well. I tweeted that out as soon as the Steelers made their selection. I kind of went back and forth between Graham Barton and Fautanu.
I would have been okay with either one, but
to me, Shayne, what it came down to was I think Fautanu is a tackle in the NFL, and I don't believe that Barton can play that. I think Barton can be a great interior offensive lineman, but that was the deciding factor for me. And if you're interested in where I had them on my board, I had Troy Fautanu number 20. I had Graham Barton 21. I had Amarius Mims 22. Like, I had them all in that same range for different reasons. I think Mims is the least safe of the three because of injuries and just very few snaps entering the NFL. But I also think the upside is immense if he turns out. If he were available at that pick, I probably would have went with him, even though I had Fautanu slightly higher on my board. I always like swinging for the fences.
I get that.
And so, and that might have been my pick. Having said that, I just didn't expect this guy to be here. Like, I thought he was going to be off the board at this point.
I thought he was going to be a Saint whenever they're picking.
It would have made a ton of sense for them. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, for sure. I totally understand that for them, and they don't have any tackles at all. Like, they're so desperate. So this is a player I like a lot. And I think the biggest question here that everybody wants to know after you make this pick, you genuinely have two left tackle types on your team now. And these last two picks, like Broderick Jones is a left tackle, Troy Fautanu is a left tackle. I don't know what the best answer is here. And I think that's what makes it a little bit curious. I don't think it's a bad problem to have. And I think if you're just looking at it on the whole, you'd rather have two left tackle types than two right tackle types. They're more interchangeable now than they used to be.
Yeah.
But I think where their specialty is both of these guys have great foot quickness. Both of these guys could have the potential to be elite pass protectors. As run blockers, we'll see. In my mind, Shayne, and I know that the Steelers might have something else in mind, the more I watch Fautanu, the more that I think maybe this guy should just play left tackle. Like his feet are so good. Like there's some David Bakhtiari like type traits to his game. And I think that Broderick Jones has more upside as a bullying run defender, a run blocker, excuse me, because he has the frame to put on more mass. And I think that he's already an overall stronger player than what Fautanu is. I just don't think that that's necessarily Fautanu's forte. I think that his thing is going to be great foot quickness, elite mirroring skills, and being a great pass protector. And I think those are better suited as a left tackle. Having said that, we've known all along how much Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan have said they want to move Broderick back to the left side. In a recent report from Gary Dulac, or I guess it was in his chat transcript, said that the Steelers would move Broderick back to left tackle. Is that something that you would do as well?
I think it's difficult because I think if you're going to move somebody, like I think Fautanu is farther along in his development as a tackle, and I think he probably can handle the transition to right tackle better than Broderick could, continuing to try to transition to right tackle full time. So realistically, I'm kind of with you where I don't know if I care that much what the answer is. I just want there to be an answer and be done with it. Like I think they have to make a decision this camp of where these guys play, and then they never move again, unless it's like injury or something, obviously. Like that's my biggest thing is I think that both of them are talented enough to play either side. I do think Broderick probably has more upside at right tackle than Fautanu has right tackle, just specifically like with what those two positions are typically asked to do. But I also just don't think it really matters because most teams, they're bringing two guys off the edge that are good enough that you can't really afford to skip out on anything at either tackle spot, right? Like it doesn't really matter that much anymore. And more importantly, like both these guys, like I said, are talented enough where if you just stick them somewhere and tell them this is your position, they will eventually figure it out. Like even if Fautanu has to move, if Broderick has to stay at right tackle, like whatever it is, I think they'll be fine. I personally would probably keep Fautanu at left tackle just because I love his film there so much. But I also understand like Broderick was the higher pick. He was the later pick at this point, less recently. I just think that if he's comfortable at right tackle, I think it's okay. But if he really feels like he'd be better at left, I think Fautanu will be just fine at right.
It's so interesting, Shayne, because I feel like any other tackle in this class, really, besides Troy Fautanu and Ola Fashanu, like there's no conversation here. Like Mim's your right tackle, Lathan your right tackle.
Yeah, they're the right
tackle. This particular one is so interesting because Fautanu had almost 2,000 snaps, just shy of 2,000 snaps at left tackle in his career at Washington. He played 2 snaps at right tackle in his career. And now already seeing, I mean, whether we like it or not, the Steelers did something interesting last year, and they didn't move Dan Moore. They moved Broderick Jones to right tackle.
Broderick is talented enough to do it. So
because and Moore obviously was not willing to make that change apparently. So, but Broderick does have a little bit of experience there. He played 3/4 of a season essentially at right tackle for the Steelers. He already has more experience there than what Fautanu does. And so if you're looking at just from an experience standpoint, maybe they'd leave him. I have a feeling though, my prediction, and that all of this is to say what I would consider doing, because I do think that most teams are right-handed and the Steelers are want to do powering right. You're wide zone now. And so the running it's kind of universal, but typically your bigger, stronger run blocking player is your right tackle in most cases, not always the case. And just knowing the situation now, I might leave Fautanu as a left tackle and keep Broderick where he played as a rookie, so you don't have to finagle it again. I think my prediction is that the Steelers are going to do the opposite. I think the Steelers are going to move Broderick back to left tackle because they've been saying that they want to do that, and they're going to see if Fautanu can be a right tackle in the NFL. My worry with him, Shayne, is when you come in at 6'3 3/4, like I do think that Fautanu is one of those guys who's got a pretty much maxed out frame at this point. He came in at 320 pounds at his pro day at Washington. I don't know if he can play much heavier than that just because you do have a shorter, little bit more compact frame. I mean, he's got the length still, but it's average in terms of
his actual frame.
Yeah. So, but where the height does matter though, is the taller you are, you can typically pack on more pounds and not lose a lot of that functional athleticism. I think when you're short and you do that, I'm like, he's not a guy, I don't think he can play at like 330 pounds. I just don't think that he's got that in
No,
his frame.
and I don't think he necessarily has to, like, his natural strength, like, especially when he gets his hands on somebody,
Mhm.
the play is over. Like, the amount of times on his tape
Yeah.
where an edge rusher tried to get into his chest and he grabs him and just kind of puts him on the ground and the play is over, just ridiculous the amount of times it happens. So, like,
So good at that. Yeah.
I'm not super worried about him because as a run blocker, he really did a ton of great stuff for Washington as run blocker, especially on the move. And in this system, I think he
Mhm.
can definitely run block at right tackle for what they're going to ask him to do. It's just,
Yeah.
again, do you prefer, like, what do you prefer at right tackle basically for this? If you're the Steelers, like, do you want Broderick, who is more of the true like power player, even though he does have plenty of finesse in his game too,
Mhm.
especially as a pass blocker, but like he just has more natural strength than Fatanu has, and he has
Yeah.
a frame to put like pounds on. Like, it's just, it really just matters what they think is best for them. And I think either way it can work out. I'm kind of torn on which one I actually think is technically better, but it's close enough where I'm not going to stress out about it unless they keep flip flopping him. Then I'll be like, guys, we do this all. Can we please stop doing this? Like, just
I get
put
it.
somewhere.
Yeah. And I want to say, Shayne, that I trust the Steelers, whatever choice they made. But then again, they started Dan Moore at left tackle last year and they made Broderick move to the other side. So, and Moore was the worst of your top three tackles. And so they do make some questionable decisions at time and when it comes to coaching. So I agree with you, though. I think for the most part, because we are kind of splitting hairs here, whatever they end up going with, I'm going to hopefully trust that is in the best interest of both players there.
Yeah, I saw this chat. We'll talk about McCormick here a little bit later, but hey guys, why does no one understand how good of a pick McCormick was? Now 4/5 of a young nasty line who can grow together. Yeah, I do think long term he's going to be one of the guards, obviously, for this team. We'll talk about that when we get to him, but I thought that was funny. And our next guy, I think, is who we're talking about probably. And whenever no lineman looks like a 45-year-old plumber, you know you got a good one. Yeah, we'll get to him soon here too. But no, yeah, I think Fatanu was just a great pick. So
yeah, and if you were wondering where he came in on the draft expert consensus board, this is from Marcus Mosier. He was the 10th ranked player. The Steelers got him at 20.
Yeah,
obviously
12,
that is tremendous value, and so hard to argue with that pick. You take the best available player on the board. You take a guy that, in my opinion, is a high floor prospect. I don't know what the ceiling is. Like, I don't think he could ever be like a Trent Williams type or anything that way.
No, but
I just don't think he's got the freakish strength to be that type of player. But I do think the floor is very high, that where you're, I think his baseline, he's going to be a really, really solid pass protector in the NFL. And if you're wondering how he graded out, like, he graded out much better as a pass protector than a run blocker. I think that for the most part matches the tape. He is awesome out in space, but I do notice that he has a tendency to let guys disengage a little bit as a run blocker, where I think that's the difference for me, Shayne. You talk about Broderick Jones, like Broderick's with those 11-inch hands, he's just going to drive you right into the ground.
People don't get away from him. Yeah,
it is interesting though. I'm so interested to see these guys at training camp here and see this line mesh together. Let's move on to the second round pick here. That is Zach Frazier at pick 51. Shout out to our contributor, Andrew False, who predicted that there would be one of the top three centers available. Studies have shown historically over the past decade that you get these guys that rarely do three centers go inside the top 50 picks. And that proved to be the case once again. Only two of those guys, Graham Barton and Jackson Powers Johnson, went. And so Zach Frazier was available for the Steelers, and this was an easy selection for them.
Yeah, and I do think a little bit of what happened with Frazier is I think he got a little bit too overhyped. I know you talked about it before, Tommy, how like you still like him as a player, but the first round hype was just too much for you.
Yes.
And I agree. I had him at 38. I think that he's a plug and play starting center. The issue is I don't know how much better he's going to get than he kind of already is. He kind of does feel like one of those players that while he's plug and play, is he ever going to be like a top 5 center in the NFL? Probably not. Could he be top 10? I think so, maybe. But you get that in the second round, and with it for a team that had Mason Cole starting at center over the past 2 years, it's a huge difference than what we've been getting. No offense to Mason Cole, but that's just kind of where they were at, where they had to target this position at some point. One of the three guys falls in their lap at 51.
Yeah, and I think that you nailed it perfectly, because as a first round pick, and Frazier was getting first round buzz, like he was landing in first round mock drafts in the 2 weeks leading up to the draft. That scared me a little bit, knowing that he was on the Steelers' radar. I would not have been a fan with that pick at that selection. No. I had Frazier 47th overall on my board. And so taking him at 51, you can say that it's a basically on value pick, but you're getting a huge positional need. So number one positional need for the Steelers with an on value to slightly value pick for the Steelers in the first round. I wouldn't have liked it. In the second round, absolutely, I can get behind it. And I think I would go as far as to say my favorite overall player on the board in the second round when you factor in the positional need and the value that you're getting. The only other name that I would have considered here, Shayne, and I know that he really dropped late, was Adonai Mitchell. Because of character stuff and just not knowing the extent of that and why he was dropping scared me a little bit. There were reports that he just has that a personality type that some teams even took them off of their draft board. And so talent wise, I had Mitchell higher on my board. Would have also filled a position of need at wide receiver, but Frazier, I think, was an obvious choice here. And at one point, Shayne, I did contemplate, like, would the Steelers trade up in the second round? As soon as Jackson Powers Johnson went, I think 44 to the Raiders. I was out. I wasn't about to trade up at that point. No. And people might argue the other way, like, why wouldn't you trade up now? There's only one left. It's because of the one that was left. Like, I like Jackson Powers Johnson quite a bit better than Frazier as a prospect. So if he would have been the one remaining, maybe I would have jumped up a few spots. But looking at it in hindsight, it's like, boy, I really think the Steelers did the right thing by not moving up here. That you would have had to part with one of your third round picks if you were to jump up in the middle of the second round to get one of those two remaining centers. And let's say it even was JPJ, Shayne. Would you rather have JPJ or would you rather have Frazier and Roman Wilson or Frazier and Peyton Wilson? We're going to talk about those guys next.
Yes. I mean, for me, as much as I like Jackson Powers Johnson, I think there's a reason why someone as good as him fell to that point. I do think there are some concerns with him medically. And, so one of the chats actually talked about how also wondering how all these guys that we draft all of a sudden have medical concerns and rumors. Could we be the source of said rumors? That's always possible. That'd be kind of fun. But no, in general, we took chances on guys with medical concerns later down the board, specifically one that we'll talk about. So I'm okay with taking more of the sure thing. Frazier, at least in terms of I know he had the broken leg, but I mean, he was running on it 3 months after it happened or something like that. I forget what it was. He seems totally fine from that perspective. So.
Yeah, he definitely does. I think he's going to be ready. He's going to be good to go. My whole assessment of Frazier from the beginning, I watched hours of this guy's tape. I think that he is a solid player. I think that's the best way to describe him. He is really good at everything that he does. He's technically sound. He's got enough power. He's got enough size. He's got enough length. He's got big hands. He obviously has the great wrestling background. We'll see how much that helped. It didn't help Kendrick Green, but it might help Frazier.
Yeah, Green just didn't have enough size.
No, he was not powerful enough at all. But I think at the same time with Frazier, though, I do think that while he's good at everything, I think that he's great at nothing. And that's not to come as a knock with him. I didn't view him as a first round pick because of that. And to use a baseball term here, I think you're hitting maybe a double with this pick. You're not swinging for the fences. And so if you had taken him in the first round, I think that you're getting maybe the 10th to 12th best center in the league. And that's just not what the position is not important enough. It's not like an offensive tackle where I'd run.
If you can get the 10th or 12th best tackle, you can take that in the first round.
and people wonder why, but Lloyd Cushenberry was maybe a top 10 center in the NFL. He was sitting in free agency this year. And so you do have to weigh the positional value as well. I do like Frazier. Having said all that, he came in at 36th overall on the Draft Expert consensus board. So well above value pick. And I know a lot of people pegged him as the best value pick in the class. I would have him third in line there, Shayne, according to my board. But I still think it was a very solid, very wise selection overall. And one that I'm glad they didn't trade this pick for a pricey wide receiver who's going to need a new massive contract. I would rather have Frazier and get him potentially to be your 8 to 10 year starter. If all works out really well and he's as good as advertised, I think that he could be that guy, maybe one that you're looking to say, yeah, this position doesn't need to be fixed again for a while.
Yeah, and I will say there was one player specifically on my board that I would have considered over him just because of my personal view of the player. But that's Renardo Green, who ended up going at the end of the second round to the Niners. But again, it doesn't solve the actual biggest problem with the cornerback position, which is slot corner. He is a outside press man corner, so I wouldn't it wouldn't necessarily fix that much of the team. So I get that for sure. But I will say I was glad to see Green go in the second round. That made me feel a little better about how highly I put him. But other than him, I was pretty happy with the pick. Yeah.
You've been talking about Green a lot,
Yeah.
and I think that would have been a good one too, where that value lined up. But man, Frazier would have been hard to pass on.
Yeah,
And so
I can't justify
basically,
that.
you and I were 2 for 2, right? We would have made the same selections that the Steelers
Yeah.
made with these 2 picks.
Yeah, I
So,
think so.
and like I said, the only other one I would have considered was Mitchell there, but the character stuff scared me off a little bit, and the need just lined up. Knowing that there was just truly only 3 starting centers in this class, you were able to get one at 51. I'll take that to the podium for sure. Let's move on to the next pick, Shayne. That is Roman Wilson, pick 84 overall in the 3rd round. This to me was one of the most surprising picks in the draft, based on the way that the draft was falling. I mean, at the end of the 1st round, Xavier Legette and Ricky Pearsall went. And so, and I had the same round grade on Roman Wilson as I did on those 2 guys. I had 2nd round grades on all 3 of them. By pick 37, Shayne, which is early in the 2nd round, there were already 10 receivers off the board. And so at that rate, I'm like, there's no chance the Steelers are getting a receiver unless you take one in the 2nd round. And if you take one in the 3rd round, you're already down to at least the next tier of guys, if not 2 tiers removed. I'm shocked that they were able to get a player that I had a 2nd round grade on at pick 84 with the way that receivers were flying off the shelf.
Yeah, and like you were talking about your grade on them, I had all 3 of those guys within 15 picks of each other. I had Legette the highest just because I thought his potential was the biggest, where, obviously he's not going to be as probably consistent as the other 2 in terms of just like week to week consistency, but his big play potential outmatches all of them. But Wilson, again, right in there with Pearsall, Legette, all those guys, Corley, like that, like those receivers. And he was sitting there at 84. And I'm thinking, okay, well, we still need a receiver. And I remember seeing on the board, I'm like, I don't know if this is where they're going to go, but like this is kind of screaming at me based on my board. I think I had him 62. Like, you got to take, and then they did. I'm like, all right, we're a bit like this. This is the type of receiver that they need. To, obviously you'd like an outside receiver because you don't want Van Jefferson to have to play meaningful snaps for you. But that might be, we already talked about that might be happening anyway. It might be getting somebody. So we'll see.
Yeah, and Roman Wilson almost went much higher than this. Joe Douglas, there was a video released, the New York Jets general manager. He relentlessly tried to trade up for a receiver, ended up executing a trade to get the top pick in the 3rd round from the Carolina Panthers.
Yeah, to get Corley.
He went with Malachi Corley, but you could see in the video the other name they were considering was Roman Wilson with that pick. And Roman Wilson, I'm positive, would have been the selection had Corley been off the board at that point. So Roman Wilson was almost long gone before pick 84. So it is remarkable that he fell this far in the draft. I had Roman Wilson. Let me just double check so I get you the right number here. 2nd round grade on him, and I had him as my 45th overall player,
even higher than me
in the draft. He was the last of my true 2nd round grades, and then I went to 1-2 grades after that. I actually had Roman Wilson 2 spots higher than Zach Frazier for what it's worth. And so that shows you what I think of the value of this selection. I just think he was so solid, a championship program, such a willing blocker. He's physical at the catch point, fast and smooth. He's not the most twitched up player, but really fast and really smooth. And to me, I compared him, like I really thought him and Ricky Pearsall were very similar players. He's just a more condensed but younger version of that guy. If you're wondering where he was on the draft expert consensus board, he came in 46th overall. Steelers got this guy at 84. I love the way that he plays. I thought he was one of the 4 or 5 best players overall at the Senior Bowl this year. That's always a big sign to me too. Like if you can really dominate the competition at the Senior Bowl, and he got the best of Quinton Mitchell a few times. That's a good sign for me. And I would have ran that card, and like that selection. I'll tell you how easy that selection and the Frazier selection were, Shayne. I had my articles up. I hit the publish button on those 2 articles the moment the Steelers officially made the selection. I could see it coming a mile away, and I'm like, I'm writing this thing, and I know this is where they're going with these 2 picks if these guys are still on the board. Now, I feared that in the picks leading up, they could have gotten snatched. To me, there was such a perfect fit the way that sequencing went in round 2 and round 3 for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't think I would have had it any other way. This would have been my pick for the Steelers. And so again, 3 for 3 of what the Steelers would have done, I would have done in this draft. It certainly does not always work out that way, but these last couple of years, it's pretty much been on par with what I would have done when that selection came around. I think you were the same way last year. Broderick, Porter, Keanu Benton, the first 3 picks.
Yeah, if I could have chosen any 3 picks for them to come away with, those would have been the 3. And these are very similar. Like I said, I think that as far as like who was on the board, he was, I have to assume I would have to double check, but I don't think anyone on my board was as high as him by that point. My top 60 got burned through pretty fast. I think by like pick 90 or so is pretty much it, like right around this area. So for me, it was definitely Wilson would have been the pick, especially because receiver is still such a huge need. And this type of receiver, when you trade Deontay, you have to find somebody who's a quick separator. You had to replace that type of receiver because you just can't survive in the NFL with a passing game that doesn't have somebody who can do that. Like it just isn't going to work. So this is a good replacement for him. I think obviously he's more of a true slot than like the slot Z hybrid. Like I think he can moonlight as a Z sometimes, but really this is a slot player that's going to just really just give defenders a lot of issues in the middle of the field, especially. So
I think so too. And maybe if he can refine that route running a little bit, he certainly has more physicality than like Deontay Johnson does.
Yes.
If he can improve as a route runner, we've just seen limited of it because he kind of rounds off his routes and everything is pretty basic on a run heavy, run first team at Michigan.
Yeah, I didn't have a lot of nuance to the pass.
If he grows in that department, like size wise, he's not that dissimilar than what Deontay was, but a little bit more bulk to his frame. I'm hoping that he's a guy that maybe could play on the outside a little bit and surprise some people there. So at the very least, I think you're getting an excellent slot option. I think that he's going to be a good player. And Shane, I did have one guy higher on my board. It was the next guy that Steelers picked.
Oh no, you're right. That I didn't even think about that. So Peyton.
So let me start with this. I love Peyton Wilson. Injury risk and all. This was without a doubt the best linebacker in the country. I really don't think there was that close of a second. I know some people would argue Edgerrin Cooper. Peyton Wilson's film was incredible. He's a splash playmaker. He's a tremendous athlete. I thought, okay, you had 2 ACL tears and a couple shoulder surgeries. All that considered, I didn't see him being on the board at pick 98. Coming when we found out he doesn't have an ACL. And so that factors in. You were missing an ACL in one of your knees. I guess if you can run a 4.43 without an ACL, you're probably a pretty good athlete. Hines Ward played his whole career without one. I think Greg Lloyd did as well. And so there are examples of guys making this work. I totally understand the reason why he fell to pick 98. Teams just aren't comfortable with taking a guy who might have a 2 or 3 year NFL career. But this is this truly is a first round graded player. If there was no injury concerns at all, like this guy goes in the first round, he makes an exception to linebackers going in the first round because he's that good. To get him at pick 98 and potentially have like a Matt Milano level linebacker that you can plug right in there and just be like a splashy all over the field playmaking type. I am so intrigued by this pick. This is my favorite value pick of the draft just because he was so high on my board. And I think that you could be getting one of the very best players. I know it's just high praise. It might sound ridiculous if the guy goes and tears his ACL in training camp like Corey Trice, but I think you could be getting one of the most talented players at the linebacker position in the league. And Luke Kuechly compared him to a bigger, faster version of himself. To give you some reference there, Daniel Jeremiah said, "This is a true first-round player. What are we doing here? How did he fall this far?" Like, it was mind-blowing, even knowing that he's playing with stabilizers in that knee. He, for what it's worth, Shane, he's been completely healthy these past 2 years. I think he did come out of the game because he injured his shoulder, but he got right back in there, played and started 21 games over the past 2 seasons. His most recent serious injury that caused him to miss time came 3 years ago now. So we're a little bit removed from that. There's reason to be optimistic here. Having said that, would he surprise me if he's a guy that goes out and suffers a season-ending injury in training camp? No, I wouldn't be shocked by it. But this is where you gamble on a player like that.
I think you said it really good, or did a good job saying it, where at this point, like, take everything that's negative. He's 24 years old. He's had multiple season-ending injuries. He doesn't have an ACL on one of his knees. You take all of that into consideration, and then you watch him play, and you go, okay, how long are we willing to let this guy just hang out in the draft before someone takes a shot? And for the Steelers, it happened to be them. And not the injuries were not nearly the same, but like the questions about Darnell Washington's knee, right? Like, he falls in the draft. Steelers like, you know what? We think he's fine. Let's just take him at this point. It's kind of stupid he's on the board. I think they looked at this the same way. Like, I know we signed Queen, and like we're hoping that Holcomb can come back at some point. Landon Roberts was good for us last year. He's something like he's on the board. Like, let's just do it. And yeah, if he was 2 years younger and had one less major injury, he's probably a late first, early second round pick. Like that's just the reality of it, right? But even if he's a one contract player, if he's the player that we saw in film at NC State as last year, then he's going to be a really, really good one contract player. And with the 98th pick in the draft, who cares if he's a one contract player? Half the dudes taken in that range probably aren't going to play out their rookie contract anyway because they're either not going to be good or they're just going to get hurt or whatever, right? Like this is not a pick that you have to say like, oh, we can't possibly take a chance on someone. Like, of course you can. Like this is where teams should do that. And the fact that no one else did until the Steelers did, I do think is kind of comical when you look at like just what he did on film. Like, is he a great run defender?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not because the arms are shorter and he can't really stack and shed as much as you want. I get that. It doesn't matter because this is a weak side linebacker. This is a guy who runs plays down. He makes plays in coverage because he's instinctive. He's fast. Well, he's fast. We watch him at the combine. Like he's not going to be asked. Kind of similar to like how Queen was used whenever Roquan was brought in. Where like he's just kind of the guy that's just running all over the place and doing stuff for them. He can do some of that same stuff, but I do think he's a little bit smarter of a player, obviously, than Queen came in as. So I'm not as worried about the mistakes that he was making. So
yeah, and I think this is one of those picks, Shayne, where you legitimately are swinging for the fences. Like if this guy turns out and he stays healthy, you could have one of the best players at his position in the league. And so I love the thought process at this stage in the draft. You're almost at like the 100th pick over here. Take guys with that type of upside. I think a lot of people in the third round, you're looking for, all right, I'm going to get a rotational guy. I'm going to get a guy that's going to start his career on special teams and maybe work his way in. Like this does not have to be the career path of Peyton Wilson at all. And so I'm interested to see how they use him. I went back and watched more of his tape, and I'm telling you, somehow he looks even faster on film than how he tested the combine.
He runs guys down sometimes from like
flies. And for what it's worth, him and Devin Bush ran the exact same 40. Bush never played like that athlete. No. And I know that maybe people argue, well, he had the ACL tear. He just seems so timid. Like he allowed the play to come to him. Peyton Wilson is attacking all the time. I think people are going to love this guy on the Steelers. And you look at their linebackers they had just 2 years ago compared to now. Miles Jack, huge disappointment. Just bad contract, huge disappointment. Same with Devin Bush, busted pick. Robert Spillane, although he was good on the Raiders last year, is not good for the Steelers. He was just an average linebacker. You go from those guys to now suddenly having Patrick Queen, who made the Pro Bowl last year, even if you think that maybe he might come back down to earth a little bit. You've got Peyton Wilson, who is just a dynamic athlete. Cole Holcomb, if he can come back from this knee injury, and Landon Roberts, who can give you all the stuff that you need in the box. They are 4 deep at this position. Yeah, I'm really, really liking what they have going on linebacker. I have not liked this group this much in a very long time now.
Probably since Shazier was roaming the middle.
It probably was, and even then, I don't know if they had.
Because it was just mostly him. It was mostly just him.
It was him doing all the playmaking stuff. So, all right, we've talked enough about him. Let's move on to the next selection here. That is Mason McCormick. This is a fan favorite for a lot of different reasons. I like this guy a lot, and I know that you do too, Shayne. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this pick. Fans were torn a little bit because I know some were thinking the Steelers already drafted 2 offensive linemen. They've got starting guards. What are you doing drafting this guy? You've got other needs. You need a slot corner. I love the thought process. To me, it's like there was no slot corners on the board worth taking at this point in the draft.
No.
You took one of the highest players on the board. You're taking a proactive approach because although you don't have a need at guard right now. James Daniels has a contract expiring after this year. Nate Herbig has a contract expiring after this year. Potentially, if this guy turns out and he can make strides during his rookie season and he can show a lot during training camp, maybe this could be a starting guard for you by the start of next year. And you just stole one with this pick in the 4th round, getting a guy who tested as a 99.6 percentile athlete. This is my perfect spot. Round 4, my favorite spot in the entire draft to take stabs on these uber athletic guys with good college film from small schools. And you're getting Mason McCormick from South Dakota State. I really like this pick, Shayne. What do you think about it?
So you were talking about how Peyton Wilson was your favorite value pick. For me, this is my favorite value pick because now, again, I was probably higher on him than the majority of people. I got to know about him pretty early because of podcasts, Bootleg Football Podcast with Brett Coleman, EJ Snyder. Shout those guys out. They do a great job with going to like Shrine Bowl. They talk to all the players there. They bring him in, and they had an interview with him. And whenever I learned more about like what he's done at South Dakota State, how he played, what he can do. And I was able to watch some film. I didn't get a ton, unfortunately. It's hard to get, South Dakota State's kind of, but I was able to get some legitimate, like all 22 of him. And 2 things stand out. One, the athleticism he showed when he tested, which is one of the most athletic players ever at his position, is what he tested as. It shows up. Like not all the time, of course, but it's certainly there. Like you see that type of player on film where he's just dominating the level of competition.
Mhm.
Guys just cannot handle him at the point of attack. Like just really difficult for anyone to do anything to him. The other key thing, and I think this is kind of where like they talked about, we took 2 linemen already. First of all, I know it's football and like people don't care about the linemen enough. You need guys. Like we look at what this group has looked like in past years. Like you could take 12 linemen. I don't care. As long as 7 of them are good, it doesn't matter. Like just keep taking them. But specifically for the Steelers, like you have a player that's 30 now, I believe, with Seumalo. James Daniels, as much as I like him, he's going to be needing a new contract if that doesn't get done, or maybe they don't need to get it done if they don't want to because they bring this guy in. More importantly, let's say Zach Frazier, for some reason, even though I think he's more of a high floor player than a busty potential player. Let's say he's not good for some reason, right? Let's just say he just can't get it done. He's not good. McCormick can play center. He talked about one thing that's nice with him is he already was making the calls at the line for South Dakota State because their center was a younger player than him. So he already knows, like the hardest part, other than just snapping if you're not used to, which he snapped really well at the Shrine Bowl, so I think he'd be fine there, is that part of it. You have to call out protections. You have to set the lineup, do all that stuff. He already has done that. So he could be the backup center right away too. Like you don't have to ask Herbig if he makes the roster to be the backup center. You don't have to ask Daniels to move to center if Frazier gets hurt, whatever. You have a guy who can fit in at all 3 interior spots probably. And for me, he was my 53rd player. Like this is a gigantic value, like 2-round value. Yeah. So again, that's my valuation. So everyone will have different valuations, but that was a huge, huge value for me.
Yeah, I really like him. I wasn't as high on him as you were, right, Shane, but this is where I still like to take stabs at these guys for what it's worth. I know the level of competition was small. Yeah. He had an 87.6 overall grade from Pro Football Focus last year, a 90.8 run block grade. Yeah, he's played a ton, like 3 just full years of 830 plus snaps per season. Guy never leaves the field. Mm-hmm. He has just I think that just the perfect developmental traits, tools, just a total package. I mean, he's got 34-inch arms as a guard, 33 and 7/8, and it tested as a tremendous athlete. Like this is exactly the type of guy that I want sitting on my bench this year and hopefully entering the starting lineup next year if all goes well. Like I can totally see that happening with him. And I know that people question this pick for the reasons that you already mentioned. And there were a few other names out there that I agree would have been intriguing. A lot of people said, well, this was a perfect time to take TJ Tampa. And I admit that there's some intrigue there as well. I'm a little bit scared off by corners that run a 4.58. And I don't, regardless of where you get drafted, I think it's always going to scare me a little bit.
The problem is I just don't know if he fits the Steelers because he has to be in end zone coverage mostly. He has to. He just has to be. Like that's what he was asked to do. And like I know he profiles. Like if you look at his size, it's a big press man corner. Mm-hmm. Didn't do a lot of that. Doesn't mean he can't do it, but his speed limitations are real. Like he's a great lateral athlete for his size, not so much just getting on his horse and running. Like that's just not what he does. And I do think in the league where you have so many receivers who can run sub 4.5 and can get on you quickly, if he's in man coverage and he doesn't get the press off right, or if he does miss his hand placement, the play's pretty much over. Like there's a lot of receivers who are just the quarterbacks are like, all right, he had a free release, all right, the play, I'm throwing it to him. Like that's just what it is. So I think he could be a good player in the right situation. I forget exactly who drafted him, but what it comes down to is that wasn't the right type of corner for us to be drafting.
Yeah, it was Baltimore that got him, and they got
Nate they're Wiggins doing a lot more zone. They're doing a lot more zone, so that makes sense. Yeah, he'll be good probably.
The other thing that intrigued me here, Shane, and I know I might be in the vast minority here.
Okay,
I'm a big Spencer Rattler fan.
I know
he was sitting on the board at this point.
I would have been okay with it.
So in my mind, like I had a 2-3 grade on him. I think if he was in the 2022 class and played the way he did last year at NC State, he would have been right there with all the quarterbacks at the top of the 2022 class, albeit in a bad year. I think to me, though, in my mind, I was looking at the Steelers don't have a QB3. I mean, Kyle Allen's whatever. You need a guy, preferably on a rookie contract, that can be QB3 now, can be a QB2 by next year. I think Rattler would have fit the bill, and he would have given you a guy that's got some things to work with there. Like I just like the way that he plays football. So that would have been probably my choice. But Mason McCormick, the more I look at it, the more I like it. I had Rattler a little bit higher on my board overall as a player, but McCormick, if he indeed ends up being a starting guard, that's going to be worth a lot more than getting a second or third string quarterback. And so
Yeah.
I can absolutely get on board with this pick. I am on board with this pick. I think that it's going to be a really good thing for the Steelers. And I'm excited to see him during training camp this year as well.
Yeah,
All
it
right,
should
let's
be
move
fun in the
on.
preseason especially. So
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about these later round picks here. Steelers have 2 6-rounders. Let's start with Logan Lee here. When you're picking this late in the draft, you're kind of looking for guys that are going to make your team, right? And so it's hard to get too upset about anything they do at this stage in the draft. Now, in my mind, I'm like, all right, maybe let's double up on receiver. I'm gonna get a Brendan Rice sitting out there.
why not? Yeah.
That's where I was going with this. Not surprised at all to see the Steelers pick Logan Lee. This is a guy they brought in for a pre-draft visit. They obviously had some interest in him. Very louder, milky like in terms of his frame. And so now it's interesting because the Steelers, they're willing to keep throwing darts at these guys. These tall guys that might not have elite length, but you've got some athletic tools to work with. And so Logan Lee kind of fits that bill again. They did it. They tried it with Loudermilk. They tried it with Leal. Nothing's sticking here. Maybe it'll stick with Logan Lee. I wasn't the biggest Logan Lee fan. I know that on the consensus board, he was way down there. Dane Brugler had him. I think it's just like a priority free agent even. And so when you pick this late in the draft, it's not that big of a deal. They did take a guy that had, I believe it was 90. He was a 92 percentile athlete according to his relative athletic score. But he's tall with short arms, kind of awkward frame. I think he needs to put on more mass. He's not going to be an edge player like Dane had him listed at. So that was kind of peculiar to me, but if he can work as an interior rotational guy, just some depth on the roster, then I think that's a hit probably in the 6th round.
So at this point, and this is why I think this pick is really funny. I will preface, like, I would have taken Daquan Hardy, who went later in 219, with one of these picks that we had.
Mm-hmm.
I get the next pick a little bit more because I think this guy has some like tools to be maybe a safety or a corner a little bit. So we'll talk about him. But at this point, show me a awkward sub 290 defensive lineman the Steelers don't love. Like, find me one, and then I might believe you. But clearly, they love all of those guys. Like, it's just that's just what they like. I don't know what exactly it is about that build. Like, I think Lee is a good player overall. I don't think he's ever going to be like pushing for any sort of starting position. I think maybe he can be a rotational guy, like you said. I just don't really. This is a very nothing pick for me. Like, I don't expect to see a whole lot of Logan Lee, and if I do, that's awesome. It is an Iowa player, so like, Big Ten, cool with that. But like, it just feels like not the right type of Iowa player to take if you're taking one.
Yeah, Shayne, I would have been much more intrigued by like the Gabe Hall type. Like you get a guy that's taller, heavier, and significantly longer. Like maybe there's something to work with there where you can put just even more mass on his frame. Like Logan Lee he does have that awkward build, and I just don't know what to make of it. It hasn't worked out so far, but I mean, maybe if you do it enough, you'll find the guy that you're looking for there.
Maybe.
But I think, to us, I don't think it matters all that much. We're talking late round picks. Like, we're not going to obviously weight this as heavily as if the Steelers were to do something similar, like in the 2nd round. So we're talking late round here. If you think he can make your roster, if you think he can carve out a role on special teams or what have you, I think his biggest competition is going to be Loudermilk and Leal. I think those are 2 guys falling out of favor in Pittsburgh. Leal obviously he didn't even get a helmet late in the year for the Steelers because they just don't know how to use the guy.
I don't know what's going on with him. I think he needs a new team personally, but
I think he probably doesn't. I'd be shocked if all 3 of these guys that kind of have that same profile end up making the roster. So we'll see what they do, and maybe he'll be a guy that surprises us in camp. At least I will credit them for saying at least you took an athlete. I mean, they're not straying from that mold at all.
He was taking athletes. Yeah.
So it tested very well. So, but he is light. I mean, you're talking 281 pounds, an interior guy. I'm sure that's what he's going to have to be. He's not fast enough to be an edge guy. So let's talk about Ryan Watts here. Last pick of the draft. I like this one better than the Logan Lee pick, honestly. And I watched several games of Watts. I watched his highest rated game, and then I watched his lowest graded game, which happened to come against Washington. And he did a lot of nearing. Well, Washington's just going to kill you.
Yeah, it's not really. I don't know how fair that is to.
Penix was dropping a ball just perfectly in the bucket, like right over his shoulder to Rome Odunze, and he matched up against Rome, and I thought he did a decent job. Like if you look at like just like the box score numbers, like I think he gave up like 5 of 5 catches for like 100 and some odd yards.
Yeah, it was bad.
A couple of these came on huge plays where he just narrowly like missed the swat for the ball. Like the positioning wasn't bad, really. He needs to be as grabby as Porter's, like he needs to find a happy medium. Like he needs to be way grabbier than what he is. Like he's for as long as he is, the guy's 34.5-inch arms, like the biggest corner in the league, essentially. You need to enforce your will a little bit more at the line of scrimmage than what he does. He kind of does that press bail and will kind of just trail the receiver. There are a lot of things to like about him, though. You just like he's essentially like 100th percentile size player at the position, and still comes as a quality athlete. So I don't know what to make of that. Maybe the Steelers view him as a safety. I would certainly, in my opinion, I would try him as a corner first and see if you can clean up some of the mechanical stuff, because the tools are really good there. I mean, to getting that type of package in the 6th round that way, I think is very intriguing. So I would try him as one of those big press man corners. I think maybe, and I don't know for sure, I can't say for sure what the plan is for the Steelers, Shayne, but maybe the plan is kind of like that Logan Lee pick. You're throwing darts on the wall. You're seeing who's going to pick. Opposite Joey Porter, Dante Jackson's probably not going to be the long-term solution there. Doesn't really fit the mold of what they're looking for. Older guy, very undersized for an outside corner, 30-inch arms at 5'10". But you drafted Corey Trice, 6'2" with long arms. You went and signed Darius Rush when he became available, 6'2" with long arms. And now you go out and get a 6'3" corner with even longer arms in Ryan Watts. And so part of me wonders, like, are they just taking stabs here to see which one of these guys, if any of them, can stick to potentially be a guy that can either fill in there or maybe even be a replacement?
Yeah, it's so tough because, like you said, I think if he just committed to, like, I'm going to press this guy into the sideline every single snap, like if that was his mentality, I think he, one, probably gets drafted a little bit higher, and two, more importantly, I think he fits our scheme better in that way. Like, I don't want him playing a ton of press bail because he just doesn't. He's a good athlete for his size, like you said, but he's not fast, right? Like he's not going. He does not have makeup speed. Like if he gets beat, he's beat. Like there's no getting back, other than obviously if the play's underthrown or whatever. But he just, again, he doesn't have great athleticism in terms of being able to run with guys. So how do you avoid that? Just don't let him off the line of scrimmage most of the time. And if you do let him off the line of scrimmage, safety's problem now. Like that's kind of probably how he should be used. And I think he has the tools, like you said, to end up working out as a corner. As a safety, I think his size profile and athleticism profile makes more sense. It's just, can he play that spot, right? Like, can he do that early? It's tough to say, but I do think he has a good shot at making the roster because of the lack of depth at defensive back. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see him in that safety role. Certainly has a side for it. I mean, the guy came in at 213 pounds at his pro day. So my preference, Shayne, and I know, again, we're talking 6th round pick here. The chances of you turning out to be anything is hard enough, let alone being in a significant role. But if you do want to try to maximize his potential and what this guy could potentially be, I'd have him cut weight. Like I'd want him playing like around like the 205 range.
Yeah, see if you can get a little bit more juice out of him. Yeah.
See if you can just get a step or two faster and use him legitimately as one of those bullying boundary corners that is press man coverage. Learn from JPJ, like learn from this guy how handsy and grabby he is. I mean, you want to lead the league in penalties, but you do want to be more physical than what you are, because you have the strength to do it. You've got the length to do it as well as anybody in the league at the position. So I'm very intrigued by the total package, and I'm curious to see where he's going to slot in here for the Steelers. If they're just going to view him as a safety and try to make that transition, or if they'll give him a chance as a corner to compete with Corey Trice and some of these guys on the outside there to see if he can stick. But I do like the package there. If you haven't got a chance to watch his film, you can go put on the Washington tape for yourself. They got the full condensed cut up out there floating on YouTube. He does give up some big plays in that game, but you can see the upside too. There's other plays
he's
where
not like completely out of place. He's not getting destroyed.
Yeah, no,
and bad.
That's the thing.
Bad
with him
matchup.
It was never a situation. It was never a Levi Wallace situation where it's like, my goodness, you were like 6 yards off this guy. Like you are in Rome's hip pocket, but Penix was dropping some dimes, and Rome is just a better football player. And so, it's definitely some stuff to be intrigued by there. All right, Shayne, let's talk about our best pick and worst pick, and then we're going to give our overall draft grades here before we go on to our next segment. We're running a little bit long, so we'll kind of cruise through this part. Who was your favorite overall pick?
I have to put my board where my mouth is. Mason McCormick was, like I said, like 2 full rounds or so, like ahead of where I had him. So, like, I have to say that just based on that. So I'll say McCormick.
Mine comes down to 2 players. It's the Wilsons here, the Wilson brothers. It's either
also
Roman
totally
or Peyton.
fair.
So, and to me, because of the value, I had them on the board I get behind either because again, Roman Wilson was the 14th receiver taken in the draft, which is just mind boggling to me. I think he was a top 10
He was
receiver, just
closer,
inside the top
definitely
10.
in top 10 than top 15.
So that one is close. I'm going to give it to Peyton Wilson just because I truly think that you said it, like if he was 2 years younger and had one less ACL tear, there are some people that can get behind him as that generational type linebacker prospect because the tape is so good, that the athletic traits are so good. And I think that he's going to work out in the NFL if he can stay healthy. So that's going to be mine for the Steelers. Let's get our worst pick. Who is your worst pick?
I mean, I have to say Logan Lee, only because I don't think they made a truly bad pick. That one is just like, I've seen this, guys. Like, can we shoot for something else a little bit, like something different than the 280-pound guy that isn't long? Like, can we do something else?
Yeah. I'm going to go with Logan Lee too. Didn't they just sign that guy, Dean Lowry? And
they literally signed. Yeah, it's just Dean
Same
Lowry.
exact body type. They do have something with that.
They got
body
the
type
high end. Like Dean Lowry's the high end of that player, which is like great, but like I don't know.
So I'm going to go with that one as well because first of all, I don't know if he does make the roster in a crowded group here. Obviously, if the Steelers would have addressed defensive tackle earlier in the draft, you're getting a guy that can make the roster. Now I'm not even so sure because you're just in a cluster of guys all in the same area there. Maybe they'll value the younger guy, more recent draft pick over some of the other guys potentially. But that I'm going to go with that as my least favorite pick as well. And then your overall grade, Shayne. I know that the consensus, the draft expert, they're giving the Steelers anywhere from an A to an A+. What do you have for them?
I mean, I don't like to give A+ because I feel like it's really hard to like justify that. So it's an A. This is the type of draft where you go into it with certain expectations and you come out and you go, they did about as well as they possibly could have done. Like that's what I think for me when I'm looking at drafts is like, could you have done a good bit better than you did? And I don't think like other than taking. Like, again, I had Hardy as like a 5th round player. So if you would have taken him with one of those 2 picks in the 6th round, I would have liked that a little bit more. But that's really nitpicking when we're talking about a full draft, right? Like, I can't really complain about that. So it's an A.
Totally agree with your assessment of that. I'm giving them an A as well for essentially the same exact reasons. It was really only the last couple picks that I might have gone a different direction with. And so,
but they're 6th round picks.
They're 6th round picks, and you still drafted athletes who could potentially do something at positions that could make your roster. And so I can get behind it. I agree with you. I don't love handing out A+. I think that there's always room to do even a little bit better. And so I'll leave it as an A as well for the Steelers. Very, very pleased. Real quick, Shayne, compared to last year's class, like would you think that it's better or worse? Your initial reaction?
It's tough because they took one of my guys, like one of my actual like legitimate guys with Benton that I like. I think last year's class felt more impactful because of like you get a tackle, a corner, and an interior player that all were starters for you last year and really good starters. So I feel like it's tough to compare those two, but I will say I think this class has even more potential, but maybe not as much immediate impact depending on who slots in where. Like it depends on how quickly these guys get in the lineup. So
yeah, I agree with that. I think they parallel each other in a lot of ways. Even like the 3rd round, like you took the best player on the consensus board last year in Darnell Washington. You did it again this year with Peyton Wilson. And it was Darnell Washington went at pick 93 and Wilson at pick 98. And so definitely a lot of similarities. Took an offensive tackle in the 1st round. I think I would give them the same letter grade.
Right. Yeah.
And just like my initial assessment, man, I think you're splitting hairs. I think you could argue either one.
You could argue either way for sure. Yeah.
So, all right. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Still Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Still Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. We love to keep bringing you this type of coverage.
Yes.
All right, Shayne, let's talk about the Steelers roster and players from their roster specifically that were affected either positively or negatively based on the draft results. Let's start with the biggest winners here after the draft. I'm sure there were some players on the team biting their nails as Pittsburgh was on the clock, especially early in the draft. Who do you think came away as some of the biggest winners of the guys that were already on the roster?
I'm just I'll talk about a couple of them individually, but the skill players are huge winners, mostly because they actually might have a chance to succeed solely because the offensive line should be really good. Like, you look at how this offensive line has been put together for Najee his whole career, right? And for, Pickens obviously being a guy that kind of has to just be the big play threat because they can't really run consistent offense. He's not going to be a guy that's going to be able to get a ton of targets in the offense, right? Now, with an offensive line that has at least the potential, now obviously 2 of these guys are going to be rookies. Maybe they don't play great as rookies, whatever. It's hard to do worse than we had last year, right? Like, that's why I was so adamant about putting Broderick Jones in the lineup, because I'm like, yeah, I know he's a rookie, but he's just so much more talented. Like, he's going to have more wins than Dan Moore. I'm sorry. Like, it just is what it is. Similarly, I think they're going to be better by default almost, just kind of addition by subtraction, but then also getting super talented players to come in and play. Najee and Warren could have a gigantic year on the ground. I was talking with a friend of mine, actually, and I was saying that if things break, right, like, obviously you have to be winning enough, you have to be up in the score enough to be able to run this much. I would not be shocked if those two became the 8th duo to rush for 1,000 yards both in the same season. I would not be shocked, because I think that's what they want to happen. Like, if the Steelers could map out their offense next year, one of the things they would say is, yeah, give me 1,000 for both of those guys. Like, that would be something that I think they'd be looking at. So with this offensive line they've built, I think that becomes a possibility that what they actually been preaching about running the football, this and that, it might be a reality now. Like, they might actually be able to do that and execute it.
It's so encouraging that way, Shayne, because they already were good at running the football. Now you
especially
add
down the stretch,
significantly more talent to the offensive line. You get rid of the 2 biggest holes in Dan Moore and Mason Cole from last year. It does make you wonder, can they do that? Like, maybe they can be that version of Fred Taylor and Maurice Jones-Drew now, that pairing that they have in Pittsburgh. So it's going to be fun to watch for sure. I'm excited about that. My winners for the Steelers, based on the draft results, I have Dante Jackson as one. And I didn't think the Steelers would necessarily draft a corner in the first round, but I think as early as the second round was a possibility. For what it's worth, the Steelers did have dinner meetings with Nate Wiggins, Terrion Arnold, Kool-Aid McKinstry.
They were prepared for that situation.
They were prepared. If worse came to worse and they were wiped out at offensive tackle, they might have gone that route. And had that happened, I think that would have hurt Dante Jackson's future with the team a little bit. Maybe at that point, you kind of just force him to be a slot corner. I don't know what you do with him at that point, but
maybe.
So that was one winner that I had. I think he felt probably pretty safe. Larry Ogunjobi was another one because again, the Steelers were looking at Chris Jenkins and Rook Orororo, Mason Smith. Had they drafted one of those guys, I think for sure Ogunjobi's role goes down, because I didn't think he was very good last year. Like, I think he took another step back last season. So he is very fortunate that the Steelers wait until the 6th round to get an interior defender who, if he is part of the rotation, it's going to be a very small facet, I think, as a rookie.
By the way, Jaguars, Mason Smith taking him at 48. Good luck.
That was rich. I was a Mason Smith fan too, but that was rich.
Trent Baalke, show him a talented defensive lineman who can't actually play yet, and he will take him every time. It doesn't matter if he's good or not. It doesn't, like, I respect the hustle for that type of player, but at some point he has to look himself and go, like, I don't know if I should keep doing this.
Mason Smith is one of those guys that I liked him in respect to where I think he should have been drafted. I don't like him at that spot, but I did I was intrigued by the
tools
player,
are there. The tools are definitely there. The tools are there.
And then I also had Van Jefferson as a winner, because
you have to.
You waited so long to get that wide receiver. I like I think Roman Wilson is going to be better than Van Jefferson day one. Like, that's not a hot take.
Different roles though.
But different roles. And that's why, because for now, at least, Van gets to keep that number 2 outside wide receiver job. I don't know how much longer it'll last. I kind of expect the Steelers to do one more thing there. But I have him as a winner for now. Let's talk about our losers real quick, Shayne. Which Steelers were affected the most by the draft results?
See, I hate to keep piling on him, right? And I feel like if I met him, I'd have to apologize to him. I'd have to be like,
I probably would too. I think he's a good guy.
Dan, I apologize. This is nothing against you personally. You are one of the biggest losers, because we finally have a tackle opposite of Broderick. Well, I shouldn't say finally, it was just last year, but we have 2 bookend tackles who I think actually can legitimately play those positions. I think he's a good swing tackle. I think he will be a good swing tackle for us this year. And then we'll see, past that, because I know his contract's up after this year. But it's just, it got to a point where, like, everyone else kind of in the league was, like, collectively like, yeah, Dan Moore's not a starting tackle. Like, it's not the end of the world. It's a 4th round pick. Like, he doesn't have to be a starting tackle. You don't expect a guy to be a starting tackle. But it seemed like everybody except the Steelers knew that he wasn't a starting tackle. And it started to make me think I was going crazy. I'm like, is he actually not good? Or am I just like, what's going on? Now I can put that to bed and say, okay, then get on the bench. We'll have you in a pinch. It's fine. It's good depth to have, but let's move on from this. So he was definitely one I had to say. Yeah.
Yeah, Shayne, I genuinely feel bad for Dan Moore.
I do. It's not his fault. He shouldn't be playing this much.
He has played to his draft value. There's no question that he's played as well as a fourth round pick. Maybe played like a third round pick.
Maybe.
The problem is you just can't plug that guy in for 3 straight years from a rookie until now and expect great results at maybe the second hardest position in the NFL next to quarterback. So it was the fault of the Steelers that he gets the bad rap that he does, because I think that if he had been a swing tackle all this time, nobody would be talking about him as a bad player. I think the job would be serviceable when called upon, but when you just see it week in and week out, his weaknesses getting exposed, he's not a starting tackle.
They kept sending him out there to get killed, and it's like, why are we doing this? Like, this isn't good for anybody. Like, I don't even think Dan's like, man, this is tough. Like, what are we doing?
And in his defense too, he had a rough slate to start the year last year.
Yeah, it was really bad.
That was a brutal schedule. So it more was on my list as well, and I have one even higher than that. Shayne, I've got Nate Herbig.
Yeah, and the reason was because shot at starting.
The stars were aligning for this guy. I feel bad for him too, because it's like, all right, you played well in Philly when called upon. You weren't a full-time player over there. You go to the Jets. You have some solid games over there. You come to the Steelers, and somehow after 5 years, you're still 25 years old. At 5 years in the NFL, you're still 25 years old. It looks like you might finally get a chance that should have been given to him last year. For being honest,
at some point,
Mason Cole should have got benched like 5 games into the season, and Herbig should have been given a chance last year to prove his worth. Now it looks like maybe there's a chance if Steelers don't draft one of these centers early in the draft, you could be that guy to start the year and show your worth and maybe get a big contract after the season. Unfortunately, the Steelers didn't just draft a center. They also drafted a guard. And so his job could be obsolete by next season with Mason McCormick there. And even if McCormick is a backup, he probably becomes the guy that is the interior swing guy for both guard and center position. So I do feel bad for Herbig. It's not working out very well for him. And I think barring an injury, his career in Pittsburgh might be a little bit short-lived here.
Yeah.
I had Cole Holcomb on the list. I know this poor guy's recovering from a serious knee injury.
Yeah.
No, you need to get an insurance policy there. I mean, the Steelers didn't want to get in another situation where you had to sign Miles Jack and these just street linebackers basically coming in and trying to do something. I like Holcomb. I still think the tape was solid when he played. I thought his tape with the Commanders was solid. He's in a rough spot now. If he does come back and he's able to play football and not have any nerve damage or anything in that knee, he's going to be certainly part of a committee at this point because of his past injury history. And just because probably Peyton Wilson is just a more talented football player. And I would be one of the most intriguing things that I think we're going to find out this year, if Holcomb comes back healthy, what on earth does the linebacker rotation look like? I mean, is Queen a guy that never comes off the field? Do you take him off the field and put Wilson and Holcomb on the field on third downs? I generally don't know what they're going to do if all 4 of these guys are on the roster and all 4 are healthy.
I will say this does give us a unique situation where most defenses, especially modern defenses, cannot afford to have 3 linebackers on the field very often. You might be able to get away with that with a fully healthy Holcomb where okay, technically we don't have coverage players, but Peyton Wilson can run with the slot receiver down the field if he had to. I'm not saying that you should, but I think he probably could do it if you asked him to. So it's like, it kind of does give you some flexibility, especially against some of these offenses that run 12 personnel, but it's fake 12 personnel. Like the Ravens 12 personnel is not other people's 12 personnel. That, that type of stuff. Or if I don't know if we're playing the Raiders, because it feels like we always play the Raiders somehow, but their 12 personnel is not going to be other people's 12 personnel, right? With Bowers and Mayer. So I think it does give you some unique situations you could do, or maybe instead of an extra safety, maybe it's an extra linebacker because the linebackers might be faster than some of the safeties we have. That's kind of one thing I'll say, but I do feel bad for Holcomb. And I also want to shout out Calvin Austin because with Roman Wilson, this chance of being a starting slot receiver is over. That's not happening. Not that I thought it was going to happen probably anyway, but that chance of him having that role again or having a chance for that probably died with that pick.
Probably did. And he drew the short straw. My goodness. You talk about being underutilized in Canada's offense. I don't know if he could have been more than a gadget, but I did like him a lot coming out of Memphis. I will say what could save him though is there's no punt returners on the team right now. Quez Watkins did some kick return stuff. Cordell Patterson, as he's going to be a Hall of Fame kick returner.
He's be the kick returner,
but Patterson has returned 1 punt in his NFL career. So it's Austin or nobody at punt returner. So I think that could save his roster spot at least. And then
I
we'll
think he's
see if
still
he's
useful.
able to.
I do think there's
Yeah.
uses for him on offense. I really do. And I think Smith, as weird
I'd
as
like to
he's
see it.
been,
Yeah.
I think he could at least come up with something. But yeah, his like big time potential role is done, I think, though.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. Do I have any other? Those were the three that I had listed on there. All right, Shayne, what moves? We'll close with this question for
Yes.
today's show. What roster moves should come next? Now we know everything we know. We've got the draft class that we have. What are a few things the Steelers need to do here now before training camp?
I think the number one thing, it's really two things that are the number one concerns, right? And everyone kind of knows it. It's second outside receiver, because right now you don't want to go into the season with Jefferson as the number two, even though Wilson's technically going to be the number two in terms of probably targets from receivers. Jefferson would be the number two outside receiver, which you told me that like 2 years ago, I'd be like, oh, that's not bad. Not so much at this point, unfortunately, for him. He had 200 yards last year, not ideal. So you would like another outside receiver, and then slot corner obviously is huge, because at this point, I don't know who would be the slot corner if we had to play a game tomorrow. I wouldn't even be able to venture a guess, honestly. Like, it could be a random safety. It could be like one of the corners that are 6'2", which doesn't make a ton of sense to me. Like, it's just weird, right? Like, having that glaring of a hole post drafts is definitely strange, but this is what the Steelers have done with slot corner the last few years. Like, they just kind of like, oh, we'll just throw somebody in there. This is part of why I wanted Hardy. Like, not that they would have let him probably play slot for like 2 years, because that's how they are with rookies for whatever reason. But like, at least it's a slot, like a guy who actually is just a slot corner. So those two are definitely the biggest needs. And then I think obviously like they could use some depth around the edges of everywhere. But like, I'd like to see Golden. I don't know did Golden get signed? I don't remember if he got signed anywhere.
I don't think he did.
I'd like to see him come back as like the fourth edge and have Herbig be the third. That would be nice. Outside of that, not a ton that I think they actually have to do. So.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Those same two positions, really, it's wide receiver and slot cornerback.
Yeah.
They just don't have a good option at either of those positions. And you mentioned like there's not even a good name to throw out there in the slot.
I don't really know what would
B.D. Bishop, who they just signed, Josiah
maybe
Scott,
that might be the best.
I'm not sure if either one of those guys are roster worthy. First of all, we got to figure that out. And so I do think that that is something that needs to be addressed for sure. And even more so than the wide receiver spot. Honestly, I think you can make do if you had to.
You could,
because
this offense does not want to throw the football 40 times.
No, they don't care about throwing anyway. So
do that, yeah,
it'll probably be one of those situations that they're going to tip their hats. Like Miles Boykin, when Miles Boykin was out there, we knew they were running the ball. So maybe that's what Van Jefferson's going to be, is just the guy that we're running the ball with this guy on the.
I don't know. Yeah, we'll see.
So those are the two positions. We'll break that down in more depth. We ran kind of long today, but we definitely wanted to give you all that after this aftermath of the NFL draft. So much to talk about. If you guys have other comments or anything you wanted to share about the draft, please drop it in the chat here on the YouTube channel. We go live every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time on YouTube. Thank you all for joining us today on the show. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Still Curtain podcast. And thanks again for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.